Welcome to this week's edition of Dugout Dish Podcast. I'm Andy Kirikides, joined by my wonderful co-host, Keith Glasser. Keith, how we doing?
Great, how are you?
Good. Today's topic, little impromptu. Think it's necessary. We'll see where this takes us. I think this could go in a bunch of different directions, but essentially what we want to do today is take some time to level set on the state of recruiting, what it takes to play college baseball, what it takes to play college baseball at multiple levels. And what prompted this conversation is a slew of other conversations with families, with coaches, with travel ball coaches, with high school coaches. And there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect on the current state of affairs and how competitive and how good you have to be to play college baseball, period, but also a lack of understanding for what it takes to play at the highest level, and then probably even more specifically, that level right below the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 12, which is what gets the most TV coverage and seems to be pretty straightforward in terms of like, you need to be one of the best players in the country. But I think a lot of times what ends up happening in this process is that people underestimate how good you have to be to play in the Big Ten and the Big East and the CAA and the MAC and all these other different conferences. Never mind that the floor to play college baseball has increased significantly. I mean, we've been going through this. We did it for 26 combined years, but the game has changed. Players are more physically talented. You can talk about the gameplay portion of it and all that kind of stuff like the old heads like to talk about. But in recruiting, what you look like, how big you are, how athletic you are, how hard you throw, how hard you hit the ball, all of that stuff matters. And the barrier to entry at a lot of levels of college baseball, I think, is a lot higher than people recognize. And I think it's important to try to level set because there's a lot of people out there. There's 25s who are going through it right now that they didn't have an understanding of what it takes to play at certain levels. They dismissed a bunch of schools that they could have played at, thinking that they were better than they were because somebody gave them bad information or they didn't want to listen to an evaluation. And they find themselves in a situation right now where they're scrambling. So we're going to try to get ahead of some of that, specifically for the 2026 class, and try to throw some numbers around. Listen, these are all generalities, right? Like there's edge cases for every scenario. But what we're going to talk about is pretty firm, and I think it'll be informational, and we'll see where it takes us, Coach. Anything else you want to add to the long monologue introduction I just gave?
No. Just tell me where you want to start.
I think the easiest place to start, because it's the most quantifiable, is kind of on the pitching side, and specifically with velocity, right? And me and you both know the velocity is not the end-all, be-all. But with that being said, there's all kinds of data that suggest the harder you throw, the harder it is to get hit, right? And
Sure.
I think for a long time, if you were 84 to 87 and you moved pretty well, like you were probably going to get some Division I looks. And that may be the case a little bit now. But I think the bar has changed significantly. And I think when you're talking about being a Division I pitcher, high-level Division II pitcher, I think those kind of go in the same category, that the barrier to entry velocity-wise, and obviously there's other things that factor into this, but the barrier to entry velocity-wise is much higher than it used to be. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not 87 to 90, 87, 88, 89 consistently, and I'm not talking about I threw one fastball at 88 during a start and the rest of them were 84. I'm talking like you throw 5 innings and your average fastball is 88 miles an hour. If you're not that guy right now, you're not a surefire Division I guy. And I think we're seeing this across levels where the average right-handed pitcher that's making it to the Division I level, the higher Division I levels, like you get into the ACC and the SEC, like Wake Forest ran 2 freshmen out there the other day. They were 94 to 97 against St. John's. Are they a little bit on the fringe? Yeah, probably. But every other team in the ACC has freshmen coming on campus that have arms like that. Most freshmen who get to campus in that top 150 range for Division I baseball, they're 88 to 91, and that you're just another guy. And I think that a lot of families, a lot of players, and even some high school coaches like to tell like a rainbow story of happiness about the kid who's 84 to 85 and like, oh yeah, like you could be a Division I guy. Maybe, but the reality is in today's game that barrier to entry velocity wise has gone up significantly. And I think that it gets misconstrued. And I think that people don't fully understand how good that next tier below the ACC and the SEC is and what it takes to be competitive in the recruiting process, period.
Sure. I think you're dead right. Like the amount of arms nowadays that are, especially in the upper tiers of college baseball, that can throw nitro there's a lot of them from both the left and right-handed side. My pushback I'll give you, and I don't. It's not necessarily pushback, but I would say that depending on where you're at from a development standpoint, from a maturity standpoint, what year in school you are, also play roles in whether or not, that's when we start getting into the projectability of where you could fit in, where you do fit in, things of that nature. It's easier, I think, if you're, let's say, a 2026 and you're 82 to 84 right now. And you have some projectability, there's some pitchability there. Like, it's easy to kind of say, like, okay, the floor is bare minimum going to be the Division III level. If you get incrementally better and next year you're 84 to 86, like, yeah, there's going to be a lot of Division III schools that are going to want to recruit you. If you make a jump and you're 87 to 89, like, now we're talking into the Division I world. And I think that there's a lot of people who have kind of, and I don't mean to say this, and I don't mean to pick on high school coaches or high school summer coaches, but I don't know how many of them have bona fide, like, Division I, multiple bona fide Division I arms, Division II or 3 arms, right? Like, it's only 7% that are going to go play, so when they're looking at it, like, you might be able to say, like, hey, this guy played for me 7 years ago and he went and pitched at Division I level. It's gotten exponentially harder to do, and the velos have ticked up across the board over the last 7 to 8 years. So what may have been true a decade ago or even 5 years ago doesn't necessarily hold true now. Does the pitchability and the athleticism and everything else that you need to be able to perform at those levels still hold true? Yeah, like, you still need to be able to pitch. You still need to be able to have breaking stuff. You still need to be able to get outs. Absolutely. But with the velo being ticked up, the hitters have gotten better. So your 82 to 84 at the Division III level is now hitting speed. You're throwing in the ping zone and you're going to get lashed. You need to either throw harder or you need to be able to throw, really be able to locate and spin breaking balls and really be able to get outs every single time you toe the rubber. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in trouble. So I think it's twofold. It's not only have the velos ticked up, but the hitters have gotten better. They're not scared of velocity anymore. And I think something, you and I talked about today, even before we did this, there's a massive difference between 86 and 89. There's a massive difference between 92 and 95. It doesn't sound like much, but when you stand in the box, like, 95 can get a little uncomfortable. 96, a little uncomfortable. Sounds like 4 miles an hour, but it's a lot.
Huge difference. Huge difference in that. And I think that a lot of people go through this process and they say, well, I'm 85, 86. He's 87, 89. Like, what's the difference? Well, 3 miles an hour is a difference. And it's a big difference. And you're talking about having a better breaking ball. You're talking about having a better chance against swing and misses in the zone. And that stuff all matters. But I mean, shoot, we talk to guys every day, all over college baseball, Division 1, 2, 3, Division 1 level. Every right-handed pitcher they got to 89 to 92. There's very few guys who are under that threshold. And if they are, they either don't pitch or they do something really unique. Funky arm slot, super unique metrics, high-end command. Like, it's just, that's what it is. And you talk to Division III coaches, and most good, Ramapo College played Manhattan College the other day. The Ramapo's a good Division III school in the NJAC, right? They're not a world beater. It's a good program, and they've always been good. They continue to be good. Ryan Rinsky does a great job there. But Brian Recca, if you don't follow him on Twitter, follow him. RECCA does a great job of covering kind of Division III baseball, lesser known Division I schools, and he highlights a lot of the talent that's at these schools. But Ramapo plays Manhattan, fall scrimmage. Ramapo ran 4 guys out there who were 87 to 90. That's a Division III program. That's not an outlier. It's the new norm in college baseball. And yes, are there guys who are 84 to 86 that are really successful at the Division III level? Yes, there are. But what I'm saying is these kids are better from a velocity standpoint than it's ever been, period. And if you want to get in the mix at some of these schools, it's not that you have to throw 89. But if you want to pitch in college, like, you have to throw harder than 80 miles an hour. The days of the guy with 78 to 81 who is projectable, like, those guys it's going to be hard for them to find a spot. They're going to have to work really hard for it. They're going to need to make sure that they have some guys in their corner. They're going to have some people that are going to need to really vouch for the character piece and the projectability. They're probably going to have that projectability. Like, you probably can't be 5'9" and be 79 to 81. You probably need to be 6'3" and you weigh 160 pounds, and the coach feels like he can put some weight on you and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that the bar has been raised significantly. And this isn't a scare tactic. We never do that. It's not about that. But after having a bunch of conversations, it seems to me that there's a gap in understanding of what it takes to play at certain levels, right? If you're 80 to 82, you can't pitch in the Big East right now. No matter how good of a student you are, you may want to go to Georgetown, or you may want to pitch in the Patriot League at Holy Cross or Bucknell. I can unequivocally tell you that if you're 80 to 83, it's not going to happen. Those guys need upper 80s arms with good breaking balls and the ability to command a pitch. The trickiest part about this is you can be 88 and still not be a Division I guy. Maybe you don't have enough command. Maybe your breaking ball is not good enough. There's plenty of those guys that go to Division II schools, go to Division III schools. And I don't want to sell Division II short, because as well as I do, there's a lot of kids who walk onto Division II campuses that are 88 to 90 all over the country. Mm-hmm. It's just, it pains me when I hear people talk about this, because doing what we do, a big part of what we do is the evaluation process, being honest with people, potentially telling them things that they don't necessarily want to hear or they don't necessarily agree with. But that's how you get to a good result in this process, is that you understand where you are, which helps you plot a path forward to where you need to be. And yeah, if you're 83 to 85 right now and you have an awesome offseason and you're 87, 88 in the spring, yeah, your process just changed. But if you don't know, if your goal is to be a Division I pitcher and you're 83 to 85, if somebody can't look you in the face and tell you need to get better, if you want to get there, they're doing you a disservice. And I think that's what bothers me most about this, is that you get people speaking from a place of knowledge, but the information they're giving out is just bad. And it hurts me a little bit inside, Coach Glass. It pains me. I cringe. I feel bad because I know there's people out there taking that information in And it's really jamming up their recruitment process because they're not getting honest information. They're not seeking the right type of schools, right? If you make a big jump velocity wise, you can always pivot. You come out in the spring and you're 89 and 90, that's what I like to call a first world problem. Like we're in good shape. But if you don't know that you need to get there in order to get into the conversation, whoever's telling you that is really, really selling you short on the pitching side of things.
I think the other thing too, and you can't highlight this enough, is when you see, 84, 86 topped at 7. It can't be more explicit. You're not, just because you topped at 87 once or twice doesn't mean you pitch at 87. Like, we're going to see that as college coaches and say, okay, it's in there. Now, when I follow up to watch you in the spring, I want to see that you're 86 to 88 and there are some more 7s in there than there are 4s. Excuse me, everyone, for coughing. I have a little bit of a thing going on here. But, I think, too many times you have a lot of people who get hung up on like, well, he's topped at 87. Like, awesome. That's great. But you don't pitch at 87. And there's a big difference in being able to top at 87 and actually pitch 86 to 88. That there's a huge difference there. We were sending some tweets back and forth today of, guys who are freshmen that are on campuses, and, the Wake ones obviously stood out. They have 2 freshmen that are 94, 97. Like, they're pitching 94 to 97. There's no top in there. They're 94 to 97 all day long. Spinning sliders at 80, 82. They're spinning sliders faster than some guys are throwing fastballs out there. And there's a distinct difference in that, in understanding where that kind of plays, right? Like, if you're 3 to 5 and you're topping at 6, there's a floor for you, but you need to make that jump in order to get into the conversation to be a Division I guy, if that's what it is that you want to do. And look, a lot of people say they want to do it, and a lot of people either have the wrong kind of path to go do it, whether or not it's with a pitching coach or what it is they're doing. Some people just don't, but that's where, if you want to be a Division I guy, you need to start, you need to put in the time, effort, and energy into doing so. And that's going about things the right way and being able to make that jump over the course of the next 7 months, right? November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July, 9-10 months. Like, you have a lot of time in order to be able to make that jump. So what are you doing with that time? You don't need to come out in April and be 88 to 90. If you are, good on you. Again, first world problem. But if you come out and you're 5 to 7, and then as you build into the summer, all of a sudden you're 7 to 9, there's a distinct difference there. And now all of a sudden you become recruitable at higher levels. And that's what you're ultimately aiming for, is to pitch in that range. And as those numbers get up, you want to pitch within that range. It's great to have a top, right? But how many times have we stood behind home plate when you were coaching and it's like 3 to 4, he touched 7 once, but it's a lot of 2s and 4s. It's in there, but we need to get that number to be more consistent as the number it is that you're throwing at, to be more recruitable at higher levels.
The other thing I'll add to that, because you're absolutely right. The other thing that's important is you need to do it in a game, right? Like, and I get you throw in your facility, you throw on TrackMan, and that, it's not like that stuff didn't happen, right? Like, you throw a bullpen and you're up to 91. Awesome. That's fantastic. But if you come and I watch you throw and you're 86 to 88, you don't throw 91. I don't care how hard you threw in your bullpen when nobody was trying to get a hit off of you and you didn't have to locate a pitch. I need to know what you do in game. And that's another thing that I think gets lost in the sauce sometimes, is that we find ourselves, especially in today's age, with a lot of these pitching outfits, and they do a great job. Like, they serve their purpose. And there's some guys out there who are freaking awesome at what they do. helping these kids get better. They throw better, they move better, they get stronger. Like they do a great job of some of that stuff. But the one thing that those facilities miss is that you have to take that into a game. And the coaches I don't give a shit if you're 88 to 91 in a bullpen session in March. If I come and see you throw in May and you're 86 to 88, I don't care what your bullpen session was. It's the same thing we talk about with exit velocity. Like, oh, great, you can hit a ball off a tee 95 miles an hour in a batting practice. Good. That's a start, right? That's a start. It's a good piece of information. But if every time I come and watch you play, you never square a ball up, I don't care what you do in a controlled environment. And that's why those numbers are so hard for people to wrap their head around at times, because when you get to some of these, the PBRs and the perfect games and they have their profiles, they only post the top velocity. They only post the best exit velocity you've ever had in an event that they've ever had. They don't post what you did in your bullpen game, or when you threw in April. They don't post that as, well, he topped out at 91 at the event in February, but in April he was 86 to 88. They don't post that. They just post the highest number. Coaches aren't fooled by that. And that's not the number you can hang your hat on. So all of those numbers, for the vast majority of those numbers that get posted on sites, they happen in a controlled environment. And coaches don't lose sight of that. They still need to see you do it in a game. Period.
The same thing goes for emails, right? When you're sending emails to coaches, if you put down that you're, 85, when I show up to watch you, you better be all of 85. It's the same as if the coach calls and says, like, this kid's 83 to 85. If I show up, you better be 83 to 85.
Yeah, you better be somewhere in that range, right?
Because
like,
if not, then it's all for naught. I'm going to.
If I come out and you're 79 to 81, like, I don't care what your coach said,
right? Because it's to your point, it's totally different game and bullpen. Especially when you're inside. The air is controlled. There's no hitter. There's no umpire. There's no fans. There's nothing on the line for you to really have the in-game pressure. And it's one of the hardest things to do in this game is replicate a lot of that stuff. Which is why you see a lot of coaches will try to do pressure pens and things like that to force some of this pressure onto guys in bullpens to be able to replicate what it is. But it's difficult to do because until you're actually on the mound and you need to make pitches, and there's a lot more that goes into it than just what you're doing, and I think that that comes into when they come also watch you play. And look, I can get over a guy being a tick or two below what it was that I was told / read, right? If you go out there and you're a bulldog on the mound and you compete and you get outs, and we had a kid at RPI who I don't even know what his velo was in high school, Alex Valley, but man did he compete, and he wasn't going to light up a radar gun, but he was gonna go out there, and it was a bulldog effort every single time he got the ball. He wasn't as good as some of the other guys we had, but he started on the weekends for us, and he won games, and he kept us in games and gave us a chance to win because that kid competed more than most kids I had recruited and played for me in my entire career. And there's something to be said about that, right? You can be a little bit below, the velocity and things it is that coaches are looking for if you have intangibles. When you always hear with quarterbacks, like, he has it. If you have intangibles that go with you and you just refuse to give in, and you can make pitches in big spots and the moment doesn't get too big for you, you can have a pretty good career. But it's never just going to be that. Like, his pitchability was off the chart. He was good, and don't get it twisted. He still had the velo to go with it. Was it a tick below what some people would probably want? Yeah, but he could still pitch. He could spin a breaking ball. He had a change up. He was down in the zone. He would get outs. But he competed more than anyone I've ever, most people I've been around and that I've coached. And there's that aspect to it too. People all the time are like, oh, it's velo. Well, yeah, it is, because that makes it easier to get guys out. But it's also hard to try to get runs off of a guy who is literally trying it, like, who does not care and will lay it all on the line to not let you score runs. Like, I can't tell how many times he would pitch himself into jams and then get out of it, and we'd be on the scathed for 5 or 6 innings. And then we'd have to go to the bullpen because we had a lot of pitches. But the point is, we were still in the game after 5 or 6 innings. And there's something to be said about that toughness aspect that guys are trying to recruit as well. That you can sacrifice. My point in this is that you can sacrifice a little bit on the velo side if the pitchability and the what do you call it, and the toughness and things like that are there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think that even if you hit those velocity ranges, you got to have that.
Yes.
But it's magnified if you're below it. Like, are there guys in Division I baseball who are right-handed who are 86 to 88 and are good? Yes. They're not the norm. That's not the norm anymore. It's probably really good breaking ball command or really, really good fastball command, super competitive kid, probably does something unique with his fastball. Those guys are not the norm anymore. Like, you go and look at, if you just went through a dozen Division I schools at all different levels of Division I, they'll post their velocities from their scrimmages, their average velocities and stuff. Every right-handed guy's average velocities 89 to 93. Doesn't matter what level you go to. It could be Marist, it could be William and Mary, it could be Arkansas. Like, every right-handed pitcher that's going to show up on there is going to throw fastballs over 90 miles an hour. And the crazy part is, not all those guys are even good. But it's the bare minimum right now to get in the mix there. And it's not to say that you can't get recruited if you're 85 to 8. You might be 6'3". You might throw from a low slot. You might have a really good breaking ball. Maybe that gets you in the door because they feel like you're going to be 88 to 91 when you get there. But if you're going to generalize it, which is what we're trying to do here, we preface this whole conversation with there's exceptions to every single rule. That 88 is kind of the magic number now. Like, you kind of got to be able to sit around 88 if you really want to get significant Division I interest, or else you need to do some other stuff at a really high level to compensate for the fact that you're just not going to throw fastballs by anybody throwing 88 miles an hour. It is batting practice in college baseball, period. Not Division I, not Division II, not Division III. 88 is batting practice for kids now.
Yeah, I mean, I know I did it when I was coaching. I know a lot of programs do it. They'll just set the hack attack up at like 90. Here you go, buddy. You're going to see it. So we got to figure out how we're going to hit this. And that velo doesn't scare a lot of people anymore. It's not something like, when we played there, there were guys who were mid 90s. We had guys we played with that were in the low to mid 90s, but it's not like it was when we played now. And that's 20 years in the grand scheme of baseball. It's not really that long of a time frame, but it's the reality now. You're watching guys, even the big leagues, when guys are not on their A game and they're not throwing 102, they can get barreled and they can get themselves in trouble. I mean, my guy Tommy Canley's out there throwing like 45 straight changeups at 87 to 91. It's a different game and there's a lot more that goes into it. But I think that the bare minimum in the velocity from the hitter standpoint, and I think that this is something that is relevant to this conversation, is that velocity doesn't scare hitters anymore like it did 20, 25 years ago. When we were in high school and you had a guy like some dude came out throwing 92 to 94, it was like, whoa, that's firm. Where did that come from? Because you didn't see it all the time. We didn't have the hack attacks. We didn't have the 3-wheel machines that can bump it up. And we had the jugs machine that shot yellow balls at you and you had no idea what was going on. There was no real way to replicate what was going on in game with a lot of that stuff. So, you could get overmatched a little bit, 20 years ago, whereas now, there's hitters are training to hit this velo. They're training to hit these breaking balls. So you need to be able to get that type of, you need to be able to get those hitters out who are training to do this. And that's where that velo piece kind of comes into play here, because it is like you do need the velo, but you do need to be able to sink it. You got to be able to move it. You got to be able to throw a breaking ball that can get swings and misses in the zone and get weak contact. You got to have a changeup. You got to be able to tunnel your pitches. There's a lot more that goes into this, because hitters now, I know that the numbers might not necessarily bear it out, but I think hitting now is harder than it's ever been, and guys are still hitting. You can't just rear back and throw 94 and think that you're going to get guys out all the time, because they see it every day, especially at the upper levels of college baseball. They see 94 every day. And the more you see 94, the easier it becomes to hit. So you got to be able to do some things that can get guys out. And the lower you throw on that, the easier it is. To your point, it just becomes BP. Like stock righty, 86 to 88. Yeah, man, you got to be able to do some serious special stuff and pitch off a breaking ball that's a frisbee, that, or the sweeper that we call it nowadays, to get a lot of guys out. Because there's so much more. The hitters are further advanced than they've ever been. And pitching still is ahead of it, right? The pitching still is ahead of the hitters. They have more data. They have more availability to get themselves better. And it's a closed loop skill, right? Like if you continue to repeat your delivery and throw your pitches, and they have the movement and everything it is that you have, you can just continue to repeat that and find success. Hitting, not necessarily a closed loop skill. There's a lot of things there that are variables that the pitcher can do to get you out. So the hitters are always going to be a step behind the hitters, or the pitchers, excuse me. But you still got to be able to do something on the mound, velo wise, off speed wise, whatever. Sink it, run it, whatever it is, to get guys out. Ride it through the zone, all of it, to give yourself the best chance in order to find success at the college level.
If you're 88 to 91 in college, you're a slider guy.
Yeah.
You're going to throw 45% sliders. And you're going to really rely on command. That's just kind of how it is. It's the way the game is. Like, you see it in the big leagues now. That same thing happens in college, just the velocities are a little bit less. But it's the same concept. To your point, Tommy Kahnle throws 95, 96 miles an hour, and he doesn't throw fastballs. Because if he throws a fastball over the white of the plate, it's probably getting hit really hard. And that's the world we live in. And it's the same way in college. If you're 88 to 91, your fastball is a secondary pitch. So that breaking ball command, that changeup command, becomes increasingly important. So these guys who are going through the process, and you're listening to this, parents who are listening to this, that secondary pitch has to be developed. It has to.
Has to.
Because you don't have room for error throwing 90 miles an hour anymore. It's just too comfortable for guys to hit off that velocity. You got to be able to cross count guys. You got to be able to manipulate shape. You got to be able to manipulate speeds. You have to be able to throw multiple different types of breaking balls, where it's the hard 82 mile an hour slider, and then you need to be able to throw in at 76 to shape it in and maybe steal a strike early in the count. The nuances of it are, once you get past the velocity thing, now those nuances, that secondary stuff, that's where coaches really start splitting hairs on players. Because there's a ton of kids out there who are 87 to 88. Well, now I need to look at the other things that factor in. To your point, the compete factor, right? How good's the breaking ball? How clean's his arm? How many strikes does he throw? What's his body look like? How quick does he move? What do I feel like I can get more out of that kid? Is he throwing a four-seamer at the top of the zone when he really should be a sinker guy, or vice versa? That's what coaches are going to start to bear down on. But that bare minimum it's just really changed for pitchers. It's changed significantly. And I think people need to be aware of that. Once again, not as a scare tactic, but you have to be informed on what the current state of college baseball pitching is. And it's different than it used to be. Yeah, command matters, but you got to hit a velo number before they give a shit about your command. You can command the ball all you want. If you throw 83, you ain't pitching in the SEC.
No, you're going to find
It's
that
just
hard
that simple.
time pitching in a lot of places because 83 is
Yeah.
hitting speed. You're just going to get hit around the yard and find yourself in spots that are difficult to manage if you don't do things that are outliers with your other pitches. I love when everyone wants to post Greg Maddux stuff. Like Greg Maddux didn't, he could have thrown 95 if he wanted to. Like Greg Maddux is one of the best pitchers to ever toe the rubber and walk the face of this earth. And too many times in this game, we look at the exception and make them the rule. Not everybody is Greg Maddux, because if they were, we'd have a lot more arms out there that are, unbelievably better than what they are. Greg Maddux, it literally is one of the best pitchers to ever play the game of baseball. From now until the start of this entire game, for another 150 years when we're all dead and buried. He's one of the best to ever do it. And, I just, not that I have a problem with the theory behind it, but let's put it into context. He's one of the best to ever do it. When you're 82 to 84, that doesn't get it done. He was doing it at 87 to 89, 91, and he was also moving the baseball like 35 inches. There's no one else on the planet who was able to do that. I have a problem when we take the exception and make it the rule. And I have that problem with a lot of things in this game, but I understand that it's part of the argument that a lot of people want to have. The fact remains that you still have to have the velo component, and it's ticked up. It's not just Wake Forest. Go look at LSU. Go look at, Arizona. Go look at Arkansas. Go look at the Arkansas numbers they had last year. I mean, Matt Hobbs, and if you haven't listened to his podcast on here, go listen to Matt Hobbs' podcast. He did a TED Talk, essentially, on how you become an option in a college pitching staff and then how you work your way in. And I know that you guys only see, when you watch it on YouTube, you only see the person who's talking. If you could have seen Andy and I's face when this was going on, we were in awe of what was being said, because it's super high level stuff, but it's true across. It doesn't matter if it's Arkansas. It doesn't matter if it's RPI. It doesn't matter if it's Millersville. It's the same type of thought process and things that are going into this as to how you do become an option on a college pitching staff, how you work your way in. Can you field your position? Can you hold runners? What things can you do well that can also complement what you do well when you pitch? Because if you can't hold runners and you can't field your position, the ability for you to be able to pitch and come into the game with runners on is now gone. You can't pitch in the back half of games in a tight game, because if they get a guy on, they might run and steal second, they might bunt, and you can't hold the runner or field your position. So now they can't put you in the game because you can't do two of the three things that you need to be able to do. So there's so much more that goes into this. And yes, the velocity piece is a huge piece, and the off-speed stuff, huge piece to the recruiting process, to where you eventually end up as from a fit standpoint and in a college baseball program. But there's a lot more that goes with it too. And this is where I think people don't necessarily understand that aspect of it either, that when they show up to watch you pitch, there's a reason they're holding the stopwatch. They want to see how quick you are to the plate. If you're a 1.8 to the plate, you're not going to be able to pitch a whole hell of a lot in the college game until that number comes down, because it's just a free base. Assuming all catchers throw a 2.0, that's almost 4 seconds for the base runner to run 90 feet. You ain't throwing anyone out. So
literally free.
Free. Couldn't be more free. And, so there's a lot more that goes into this than just if you can't field your position, if you can't throw the ball to first base, if you can't throw the ball to second base. All of these things factor into you being an option to pitch on a college program. Like, the velocity piece can be great and you get recruited off of it, but you could get to campus and they might say, hey, you need to be a 1.4. And right now you're a 1.8. And now your velocity ticks down. You get hit around. You have to start figuring those things out. The earlier you can figure those things out, the quicker you're going to be able to find success at higher levels, because those things matter in the college game. They matter in the college game. They matter in the pro game. Maybe not nearly as much as, fielding your position still matters. Maybe not necessarily holding the running game, but I bet you if you put a watch on a lot of those guys, there's not a lot of dudes who are 1/8. They're still being able to leg lift, get down the mound. They're able to knee knock. They're able to slide step, to do all these things to mitigate that run game. Now, the flip side to it, those catchers have legit arms. But the point is, there's a lot more than just the velo part that you have to be good at.
Let's talk about the position players for a few minutes. This one's a little bit harder to put a finger on because the barrier to entry is harder to define, right? But I think a couple things that are really important to understand. Middle of the field athletes get recruited to play in college. Shortstops, center fielders, catchers. For my money, if you're going to play college baseball at any level and you're a position player, you need to do at least three things really well at the level you're getting recruited at. Now, it's going to vary. Like being a good defender in the ACC is a lot different than being a good defender in the Liberty League, but you need to be a good defender. You need to be able to throw. You need to be able to run. You need to be able to hit. You need to be able to hit for power. Like you need to do three of those things for me, kind of bare minimum, in order to get recruited. I think it's become increasingly important to be a good defender. You have to be able to wear a glove somewhere. The hit tool is always a valuable one, but at some point, coaches need to feel like you can legitimately pay a position somewhere, and you're not going to be a detriment to the team. You're not going to give up runs. And that's why most college coaches are going to lean towards high school shortstops, high school center fielders, and catcher, because those shortstops can go to third base at the next level. They can go to second base. Not saying that high school third baseman and high school second baseman don't get recruited, but athleticism kind of trumps everything in this recruiting process, specifically when you get to the highest levels. Athleticism trumps everything. And you can listen to Wake Forest, you can listen to Wofford, you can listen to the University of San Francisco. Go back, listen to some of our podcasts. They all start with athleticism. Yeah, 60 times you don't run 60 yards in a straight line in a baseball field. So some people who don't run good 60s discount the 60 time. But you know what it is a measure of? It's a measure of how freaking fast you can get moving. And guys who move fast are usually athletic. Doesn't mean you can't be a 7-0 runner and play shortstop. But the guy who's a 7-0 runner and plays shortstop at a really high level, they're the exception to the rule, not the rule. Like guys who can run are athletes. Athletes can develop faster. They usually have more bat speed. They usually can throw better. Like athletes are what coaches are looking for, and it's why they tend to focus on shortstops and center fielders. If you don't have one of those tools, you better be able to hit, and you better be able to do something else really well. Hit for average, hit for power, and you better be able to man some other position and do it pretty darn well, right? You better be able to play left field really, really well. You better be able to do a lot of the small stuff that's going to help a team win games. Like there's a lot of different ways you can get recruited, but fundamentally, if you're going to break it down, you're going to generalize it. Middle of the field athletes are where coaches are going to spend most of their time. They're looking for guys who can run. They're looking for guys who have bat speed. They're looking for guys who have athleticism. Once you start to check those boxes, then they're going to get into the finer points. Can you manage an at bat? Can you handle velocity at the plate? How do you position yourself defensively? Can you field consistently, right? Can you make the throw on the run if you're a shortstop? Can you throw from multiple angles? They're going to get to the nitty gritty, but you got to pass the eye test first. You got to pass some of those baseline metrics tests first. It's really hard to get recruited if you run a 7-7, and I don't care how good you hit. It's really hard to get recruited if you run a 7-7 because there's other guys who are just like you that run 7-2s. Yep. So once again, it's not a scare tactic, but people have to understand this. One, because it helps drive what you look at and where you focus your time in the recruiting process. But this is the perfect time for people to hear this because you've got 6 months to go get better. If you're a 7-4 runner right now and you fancy yourself a shortstop, if you want to play shortstop in college, you better get faster because you're not a shortstop at college running a 7.4 right now. It's a period. Because there's no way that you run a 7.4 and you have the prerequisite range to go and play shortstop. You're a third baseman. Shoot, you might be a first baseman in today's age. But people need to hear this, because if you think that you can get by with average metrics, you're going to get overlooked and you're going to get passed by the guys who have better metrics than you, regardless of how hard, you might have hit 400 in your high school league. But if you don't have the prerequisite bat speed and you don't have the ability to run and you can't defend somewhere, coaches aren't going to project you out to the college level. Being a good high school player is the bare minimum in this process. It's the bare minimum. You have to be a good high school player before you can be a college player. We talk about it all the time. You got to be recruitable before you get recruited. Hitting 375 in high school is where the conversation starts. And it still doesn't mean that you're a college player. And that's the hardest thing it's one of the hardest things I think people have to wrap their head around, is that high school success doesn't necessarily mean you're a college player, but high school success is pretty much a prerequisite for being a college player. And those are hard things to separate.
Yeah. Having success at the high school level is a prereq for you being recruited. But it doesn't mean that just because you had success, you will be recruited. And it is hard to wrap your head around, because it depends on who you're playing against and what you're doing. You could be a big fish in a very small pond, and then when you step into that big pond, you're not very good. And that doesn't mean that you're going to be recruited, because when you have to level up and play a bunch of guys that are of college caliber and you can't hold your own, it's going to show out on the field to the point where no one's really going to want to be interested in that. And I think the position guys too, like there's so much more that goes into it from being a position player. You have to be able to hit and you have to be able to play defense. I used to tell guys all the time, I can't have a bunch of one-trick ponies, right? Like I can't just have a bunch of guys who can hit, or I can't just have a bunch of guys that play defense. I need to have both. You need to be able to hit. You got to be able to play defense. I think, and I'm fairly certain in a lot of the conversations that I've had and we've had with coaches, that the importance that's going to be put on defense with this roster crunch is going to be pretty high, because they can't take a bunch of guys and just hit and kind of plug and play guys as the games goes on. They need guys that are versatile and can play multiple positions. You can play in the middle. You can go play in the outfield. Hey, he's a shortstop in high school. We're going to recruit him as an outfielder, but if in a pinch, if we needed, he could play second base, and we're not going to lose a whole hell of a lot there on the offensive or on the defensive side. Flip side, he could play third and second, but hey, he can play right field too. Now you have three positions that you can play, and you can move things around in the lineup, and it gives a little bit more versatility to what it is you can do. Is that going to be the rule? No, it's not. But I can promise you that the premium that will be put on athleticism and the ability to be able to move guys around once they get to campus is going to be a lot higher than it's been in years past. This does not mean that guys haven't been recruited as shortstops and been moved all over the field. It's been going on for years. There's a lot of programs that have done it. There's a lot of programs that will continue to do it. I think there's going to be a lot more programs that will move into this type of model of, hey, he plays in the middle. He plays short and second in high school. Can he play third? Can we put him in the outfield? Like, what else can he do besides just solely play one position? And I think you're going to see a decent amount of third basemen who might be a little bit slower with their footwork that might be put over to first base. Like, they have good feet. They're just a tad bit slow. Like, we might throw them over at first because they can bang it, and their glove's good enough where, we can put them over at third or first, excuse me. And you're starting to see, and I think I've mentioned this before, a lot more programs that are moving towards more athletic first basemen. Because if you think about it, who handles the ball the most in the infield? The first baseman handles the ball the most. You want a guy over there who's pretty athletic, who can dig balls out, who can jump for balls, who can tag, who can move around and do some things. Now, it's in a confined space, so if you have good feet, but they might be a tad bit slow, you might find yourself over at first base because you have the athleticism. It's just it's a tick slower than being able to get off the ball in the infield. So it's interesting to me what's going to happen, but I think the premium is going to be put on athleticism and the ability to be able to defend and hit. And I think some people will sacrifice a little bit of one, depending on what type of program you are, for the other. Like they might put a higher premium on defense. We're going to go after guys who can really defend, and we'll get them to hit, or vice versa. We'll sacrifice a little bit of defense if they can really hit, but we really have to put a premium on getting them better defensively. Like you're going to have to be serviceable before you even set foot on campus. Not he can hit. Let's see if he can defend by the time he's a sophomore. It's going to be he's got to defend when he's a freshman. We'll get him better because the bat plays. And I think some of those things are going to start to change because of the roster crunch and getting down to 34 and those things. You're going to have to be able to do both. And I think that in our game, a lot of people are a lot more, you see it on Twitter all the time, and it's all swings and videos and all that stuff. Like it's just swings. You have to figure out a way to be able to get better defensively if you want to have a shot to play college baseball. Because especially at the Division I level, you got to be able to defend to get on the field. And usually it's the easiest way to kind of get yourself into the roster and into the mix, being able to defend at a high level. Because working in an offense, we can sacrifice one slot in our lineup if we get really high output from a defensive position there. Whereas you can't sacrifice 2, 3, 4 spots just to hit because you're going to give up more runs defensively because you're not going to be that good there. So, this is the game within the game, and I'm probably going a tad bit too deep, but the point is that you have to be able to do both. You got to hit, you got to be able to play defense if you even want to be considered for a roster spot at really any level in college baseball, but specifically at the Division I level with the rosters going down to 34 next year.
Yeah, listen to the podcast with Chris Draz. Got a great story about Zach Shank and how Zach was able to be a serviceable offensive player early on in his career because he could really defend, and how he turned into a good offensive player. I think that's the path for a lot of guys is you get stronger, you learn how to manage a bat so you can become a pretty competitive offensive player. And then the other one to listen to, and you had alluded to him earlier about his TED Talk about pitching, but Matt Hobbs at Arkansas also talks at length about how if you want to play for them positionally, you have to be able to defend. Like Coach Van Horn you're not putting on an Arkansas uniform and being in the starting line at Baum Stadium if you can't play defense, period. It all starts there because they got guys who can hit. They don't have any issues trying to find guys who can hit. But they're going to put their best defensive lineup out there because in the SEC, I mean, it's no coincidence when you look at the College World Series, the teams that win and the teams that go a long way, they all play exceptionally high level defense. That happens for 2 reasons. 1, they recruit it. 2, they're the most athletic. But 3, they put an emphasis on it because at the end of the day, baseball is a run prevention sport, and you can impact a game with a glove on if you go 0 for 4. You can still do something that helps win a game. You make a diving play, you turn a double play over. Shoot, maybe you just convert 5 ground balls into outs playing shortstop. Like you helped. If you went 0 for 4 or 0 for 3 and you walked and you made 4 or 5 plays at shortstop, like you were a benefit. But if you can't play defense and you're gonna make errors, you're gonna put balls in bad spots, you're not gonna be in the right place, like the only way you make up for that is by absolutely raking. And as you mentioned, it's hard to hit. So coaches are going to lean towards guys who can play defense. And I think that it's kind of a prerequisite these days that you have to be able to defend somewhere, and then we'll figure out if you can hit or not. Period. I mean, how many guys have we talked to, not just about guys that we're helping, but just in general where, yeah, man, I really like the bat, but I don't know where we're going to play him.
Yeah, I mean,
all the time.
Think about how many times you thought about that when we were coaching.
Yep.
Yeah, Bat plays, but where is he going to play defensively? I can't take 9 DHs. At some point, they have to put a glove on and go out there and play. And I think that gets lost a lot sometimes because depending on the area of the country you're in or what you're doing, there's not a whole lot of emphasis put on the defensive side of the ball. And I think about how many times I've said it a billion times on here. Like I didn't even know what a double cut was when I got to college. And the defense, generally speaking, the defensive end of things when you get to college is where kids are as position players and pitchers. I guess you could argue that's where they are the most deficient in what it is that they need to do to catch up to everyone else in college, aside from maybe the physicality. But from a pure gameplay standpoint, it's usually going to be the defensive side of things where they're going to be out of position. They're not used to the speed of the game. They're playing too far back. They're too far in. How many high school outfield games have you gone to where the outfielders aren't even straight up? Like they're like not even close to being straight up. And for straight up, for everyone, just if you have no idea what it is, you line up off of second base. So the left fielder is in line with second base, center fielder is in line with second base. Usually we'll shade oppo, and then the right fielder is in line with second base. And then we move based off of hitter, based off of pitch, based off of those things, count those types of things. Like if it's 0-2, we're going to slide oppo in because the chances of them actually flipping, pull spinning a ball down the line is a lot slower or a lot lower because we're probably throwing a breaking ball away. So unless we just middle that ball and it gets hung, that's the risk you take. But if we make that pitch, he might flip that ball out to the oppo side. We want to make sure that we can defend that ball. So these are some high level things that we'll get into, but think about how many high school games you go to where the left fielder is like 7 feet off the line. The center fielder is literally dead center off of second base, and the right fielder is on the right side of the second baseman. And there's just outfield everywhere. They have no idea how to actually line up.
No.
And then you go to these games and it's like, well, no wonder this kid has 15 doubles. Like the other team doesn't even know how to defend. And it's nothing against the kid who just got the hit, but in college, that's an out. And that those are things that factor in. How many times when I was coaching, especially with freshmen, when they're playing the outfield and you're inter squatting, get in the park. You're defending the line. And I've never understood it because I think he's coached a little bit. The likelihood of the 70% of balls that are hit, give or take, is through the middle of the field. We're not defending the line. The chances of that ball being hit down the line are a lot lower than being hit to the center of the field. So, we're not defending the line. Get off the line and go play where you need to play. But double play depth for infielders, where they play. Third baseman, where are they playing on guys at the top of the lineup, towards the middle of the lineup, to the bottom of the lineup? We had a guy who played for us at RPI who was unbelievable defensively. He made 3 errors his entire career. He pretty much started at third base from the second he set foot on campus. He did not move his feet. He stayed. He played pretty much in or even with third base. Didn't matter who was up in the lineup. That is not something that I would subscribe to. But when you only make 3 errors in close to 200 games, you can play wherever you want. But my point, again, there's an outlier. That's an exception, not the rule. So where are you playing on there? First base, and where are we playing? Catchers, what are we doing? You are directing the entire field on what's going on. Double cuts, regular cuts, lining guys up. You're managing the pitching staff. These are all things that those are the things that are the deficiencies that you have to coach into a lot of your younger players when they get to campus. It's not necessarily the swing. Generally their swing, you recruited them to your team, so you believe that their swing can play. Are you going to make some adjustments and talk about counts and things like that as they get older and to put themselves in the best position to be able to find success offensively? Absolutely. But the pure coaching end of things, the deficiencies are a lot more on the defensive side of the ball. And my point in this very long-winded soliloquy is that if you can get really good defensively at a young age, you're going to be able to find yourself having more opportunities at the college level, because there's not a lot of things that you are going to be overwhelmed with in that moment, because the game is slowed down for you. You know where you're supposed to be. You know where the ball is supposed to go. And are you going to make physical errors? Absolutely, you're going to make physical errors. That happens in this game. But the more that we can cut those down, and not only in game, but in practice, because that's where you're being evaluated the most. When you're inter squatting, when you have coach pitch, when you have all those things, those are times to work on all of these things. There's a reason that we do those things, so that we can speed up the game and put more pressure on people to replicate that, to see if we can handle it. And that's where you're going to find your success, and where you can kind of really shorten down that learning curve, so that you can find yourself having more opportunities to get burned and play in games. And I think that that's where, aside from the base running thing that you'll hear everyone complain about, like base running isn't taught either, but those are things that we can take time to really talk about, stuff like that. The pure, no one's necessarily going to not put you in a game because you're not the strongest base runner, right? You'd have to be a dreadful base runner in order for a coach to be like, yo, I can't put you in the lineup because you can't run the bases. You would have to be the worst base runner in the history of base runners for that to happen. Because if you can hit and play defense, we can work with it. But I think, again, my point is you need to be able to defend. And if that's going to be one of the bigger deficiencies for a lot of coaches when you get to college, start working on it now, so that you can, when you do get that opportunity to go play in college, that automatically makes you an option. You might not play every day. You might not play every inning of every game, but I can promise you, if you're really good defensively, you're going to find yourself in the 6th or 7th inning of tight games, because, hey, he can defend. And all of a sudden, you squeak out a hit. You do it again in game 2. You might find yourself playing game 3 because the other guy that you're playing is the same defensively and he's struggling offensively, and you've had some hits. And it's the easiest way to kind of get yourself in the lineup. It's a lot harder to hit your way into the lineup. It's a lot easier to defend your way into the lineup and subsequently get more burn that way. I was very long-winded and I apologize, but I think it's an important distinction to make for position guys when they get to college, that it's never the, I need another 2 or 3 at bats to okay, you can get another 2 or 3 at bats. You might not get a hit, but you're also fielding 820. I can't put you in if you're fielding 820. I can put you in if you're feeling 990. I can live with that, but I can't live with it if you're fielding 820 and also hitting a $110. You're going to be sitting on the bench next to me.
100%. I mean, it's such an important part of the game. And as you go through this process, and from a recruiting perspective, we're in that period where you're in the off-season portion of this. If you're not trying to become broadly more athletic, you're missing out big time. Right? Yes, you should go and hit. That's easy to do. But if you're not working on your defense, and you're not working on getting faster and stronger and more agile and more mobile, you're really, really selling yourself short, because bat first guys it's really hard to get recruited if all you can do is hit. There's just not enough roster spots anymore.
And I think
be able to defend somewhere.
I think one of the hard things too is it's harder for infielders and more specifically outfielders to really get a lot of defensive work in during the offseason, pending where you live in this country. It's relatively easy if you live in the Southeast, a little bit harder if you live in the Northeast. I think for catchers, it's obviously easier because you need to be available to catch bullpens and do things. So you can really hone in your defense in the offseason with, you can just find a hack attack and just catch hack attack, catch the hack attack and work on velocity and work on receiving, work on blocking, all of those things. Footwork. And then when bullpens start firing up, you can catch as many bullpens as you want. And the secret to this is the more you catch, generally, the better you get. From an infield standpoint, I do think it's a tad infield and outfield. It's a little bit more difficult because if you're limited by facilities and outside time, it can be a little bit more difficult to get better at reading balls and things like that, which is why when you get to college, you play BP live so that outfielders can get as many live reads as they possibly can, things of that nature. But from infield, there's a million drills you can do as an infielder to get better. If you're an outfielder, hop in on those drills. I can promise you, if you're doing footwork stuff and speed training, you're going to be at least faster and more agile and athletic in the outfield. Now we just got to work on reads, and you can start cutting down the time it is that you need in order to feel more comfortable being good at that, at your position and in-game stuff, because that stuff will come. But if you can cut down on some of that in the off season, I know you're limited with facilities, but if you can cut down on it, I can promise you're going to put yourself in a better position in 4 or 5 months versus doing nothing and then having to catch up a lot more. That transition into the season becomes a little bit longer than it could have been.
Spot on, Coach. If you're not working on the defensive side, you're really selling yourself short, because it's going to pay dividends in the recruiting process. And as you have alluded to, it's going to pay dividends when you get to school and being able to prove that you can handle yourself when somebody asks you to put a glove on. Anything else you want to add, Coach? We've been going at this a little bit.
No, I don't think so. I think I guess the only thing I'll add is just that it's not, again, this is not a scare tactic podcast. This is what it is. This is what we know. This is what we've seen happen over the course of the last 20 plus years that we were coaching and doing this consulting stuff, that this is kind of just the reality. And if you legitimately want to go do this stuff at the college level, you need to put forth a lot of effort in the off season in order to make those jumps. And that effort looks different for everyone, right? We're not opposed to dual sport athletes, but you still got to be doing something baseball wise. Maybe it's not 5 days a week, but hey, if you can get in and throw or hit 2 or 3 days a week, that's better than 0 days a week. Right. And I think that's an important distinction to make, that, I know that there's a lot of stuff going on nowadays, and, kids have a little bit more to do than they probably have in the past, I think. But, you can find time. And the reality is that if you want to play at a high level of college baseball, there's some semblance of sacrifice you're going to have to make in what it is that you're going to do in order to make it to that level. So, find the time, and look. You can go hit for 45 minutes and get all the swings in that you need over the course of a day. And you don't need to go in the cages for 3 hours. Go hit for 45 minutes. Hitting for 30 minutes is better than hitting for 0 minutes. And stack those on top of each other, and you'll find yourself in a far better position.
It never hurts to be more athletic. I think that's what I'll leave it. Whether you're a pitcher, position player, it never hurts to be stronger, faster, more agile, more mobile. You're only going to get better. All that stuff's going to improve the defensive side, your velocity, your bat speed, your coordination. That's what this time of year is for. And, I'll just, as you said, this isn't a scare tactic. The goal of what we do, why I think we're really good at what we do, is that we speak honestly. We speak informatively. We speak from a place of experience, and we speak based on what the hundreds of coaches that we've talked to over the last couple of years tell us, right? This isn't us speaking in a silo. This is us communicating what college coaches are telling us, and it all makes sense. It's very easy to understand. So I hope that this podcast today was informative and at least level set kind of what it takes from a talent perspective, but also kind of at the back end here hitting on what that commitment needs to look like in order to get there, and how you're going to close the gap, and how you're going to get yourself in a place where you're a recruitable student athlete. Don't forget the academics.
Yeah. Make sure you're doing well school-wise.
Yeah. All right. Well, Coach, as always, freaking pleasure. We'll be back at it next week. Thank you for listening, everybody. Talk to you soon. Thank you for listening this week. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and smash that like button for us. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, as well as Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EMD Baseball. If you want to find out what me and Keith do to help families and players navigate the recruiting process, go ahead and check us out on emdbaseball.com. Take a few minutes to check out our new online academy. I promise you'll get some good information out of that. Thanks again for listening. Check in with you next week.